Welcome to this episode of Intellectual Catholicism. Today, I am here with my friend Aljo Abraham. Aljo is a really good friend of mine. We met actually after a Latin Mass in Kansas. And then from there, we just got to know each other. And then he eventually introduced me to the Syro-Malabar Rite. And that's kind of the subject of what we're here to discuss today. But before we get into that, Aljo, how have you been?
I've been doing well, Swan. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing pretty well. Last time it was funny because the last time I recorded here in this room, it was filming an episode on the canon of scripture, and it was like really warm in Boston or
Mm.
Cambridge, I should say. And now here at this time, it's getting colder. So, I went from like sweating in the first video to now I need to wear this jacket. It's kind of funny to watch like the weather just go all over the place.
Yeah, it's crazy how fast it will change, right?
How's the weather in Kansas?
So far, it's pretty temperate. I wouldn't say it's cold just yet, so we still have a little bit of summer left, summer weather
Mhm.
left. Yep.
All right. All right. Just how I remember it. Hasn't changed.
Yeah.
Well, Aljo, before we get into exactly what is the Syro-Malabar Rite, I think it would be worth kind of discussing, maybe your YouTube channel, getting that out there, but also what your connection is to all this. And maybe that might actually get into what the Syro-Malabar Rite is, but take it as you wish. Like introduce yourself and why you care about this subject.
Yeah. Um, Very much, I would say that my journey in faith is very much intertwined with the Syro-Malabar Rite. So even when I explain about who I am and what I do and what I'm kind of like my mission right now, it's going to be very much joined with the Syro-Malabar Rite and the liturgy. So I guess I could begin. So again, my name is Aljo Abraham. So born and raised in the Syro-Malabar Rite, and I was also born and raised in Chicago, and I was fortunate to have a Syro-Malabar church near us, or near enough where we could attend it pretty regularly. And we went to CCD there on Sundays. We were pretty active, you could say. Growing up, we would go there for Sunday liturgy, the Holy Kurbana, which I'll get more into later.
Mhm.
And went through the CCD program, all that kind of stuff. And I think at times we did learn about what the Sierra Malabar Rite is or like its differences and that kind of thing. But it really didn't hit until a lot later in my life, especially as I started maturing in my faith. So I knew a lot of things about Catholicism, started reading more into how to defend the faith and different things we believe in,
Mhm.
especially when it came to a lot of hot button issues, especially during the time when I was in high school. There was a lot of issues that was being debated, whether that be the pro-life issue or about marriage and everything like that. So definitely during that time was very important to grow in that kind of intellectual aspect of the faith, getting to know how to defend it. But in terms of really getting into what do these rites or like what does the Syro-Malabar rite or Latin rite or anything of that kind of nature, that wasn't really investigated or really it didn't really click until a lot later. But as I got to my senior year of high school, I was discerning, and I felt this call or this inspiration to try out seminary. And during that time, there was several seminarians that I knew that were studying for the Syro-Malabar Rite. So when I entered seminary, I joined for the Syro-Malabar Rite. And so from there onwards, that's when I started really getting deeper and deeper into what the Syro-Malabar Rite is, more about its history, its traditions. Even though at times growing up I might hear tidbits and I'm living it out, but it didn't um, really become anything until a lot later. And so where my really, like my kind of journey into the Syro-Malabar Rite and everything kind of really takes off is after I left seminary, I I was friends with this one. He was a Capuchin brother at the time when I met him, and then he discerned out, and we
Mhm.
were roommates for a period of time. And he just happened to know a lot about the Syro-Malabar Rite, and so he started teaching me so many things that I never even heard from like a lot of priests. He was just so fascinated by its liturgy and its history and everything like that that he just started digging into it and he started sharing with me about it. And so I really just took a lot of those things to heart. And this is where around the time when I made the YouTube channel that you referenced. So I called myself Brother Syro. I
Mhm.
thought it was kind of like a fun name at the time. During that time, I was also still kind of discerning to possibly go back to the seminary too.
Hmm.
So I, like sometimes when you think of like a title like brother, you're thinking like, oh, that guy's like a seminarian or about to be a priest or something, monastic life or something like that. But I just kind of went with it. I just liked how it flowed, Brother Syro, and I made a channel. And the first video that I made was Mass versus Kurbana. And the reason why I made this video is he made this argument about talking about how each tradition has its own terminology when they're referring to their liturgy. So the Latin rite would call their liturgy the Mass. He was very familiar with the Byzantine rite as well, and so they would refer to the Byzantine liturgy as divine liturgy. And similarly, for the Syro-Malabar Rite, we would say Holy Kurbana. And the up until that moment when he made this argument to me, if I was speaking in Malayalam, I would say Kurbana. But if
Hmm.
I was speaking in English, I would say Mass to describe the Holy Kurbana. So it really kind of flipped something in me where I was like, oh, he makes a really good point, and I need to tell people about this. And so for a period of time, I was actually like trying to rework my thinking about it too. It took a while before it finally clicked. And now if I say Kurbana, you know what I'm referring to. When I say Mass, you know what I'm referring to. I don't try to, interchange them or anything like that
Right.
because I found it really important to preserve that word and
Hmm.
also honor its tradition and its kind of history and the origins of the different terminologies that we use. Um, so that's kind of how that channel kind of came about. Just this kind of moment where that clicked in me that okay, there's something special here. There's something that's worth preserving, worth kind of knowing more about, and also sharing. But so I was doing that for maybe like a year or two, and I stopped. I just kind of like I made a few videos, then stopped, and then again I kind of came back and returned. I made this like whole like movie trailer kind of video. I was like, Brother Syro returns and everything. And then I made a few more videos and then I stopped again. And so then my kind of like story comes to where I got to Kansas City. And there's definitely like quite the saga that led me to be in Kansas City. But one of the things that happened when I came to Kansas City was I was in some ways not expecting to live a Syro-Malabar lifestyle or like be connected to the Syro-Malabar faith. When I was in Chicago, I would pretty regularly, even when I was like whether I was making videos or not making videos, the Syro-Malabar Cathedral was my parish, and so I would go there. I was getting involved there, but when I left Chicago to come to Kansas City, I didn't think I was going to be connected to the Syro-Malabar Rite. I actually didn't even think that there was going to be like too many Indians or like Syro-Malabar people even like in Kansas City when I moved here. And I started getting involved and in touch with City on a Hill. So I definitely want to make a shout out to City on a Hill, a very great organization in Kansas City.
Hmm.
And if anyone's looking for good Catholic young adult community, Kansas City is the spot. So
Hmm.
anyway, but yeah, so I started having some conversations, and I think like maybe like the third or fourth person that I talked with, I just happened to somehow talk about being Syro-Malabar. And this person, out of any person that I talked to, and then even afterward, this person just happened to know, hey, actually, there's a community that meets pretty regularly or like somewhat regularly in Kansas City. You should go check it out. If you are Syro-Malabar, you should go check it out. And the kind of funny thing about the story is, if I remember correctly, I believe his name was Peter, the person who told me like there is a Syro-Malabar church or like a mission, sorry, like a small community in Kansas City. And so Peter was telling me like, hey, there's something like for you. And later on, when I like started getting more involved, I like think back at this moment. I'm like, maybe this was God's kind of way of being like, like Peter, kind of telling Thomas, hey, worry about your worry about your community and go there and serve there. But so it took me a few months, even after that kind of conversation, him telling me about the Syro-Malabar community in Kansas City, for me to finally show up one day. So one day I, looked on the site. It said that there's a Holy Kurbana meeting at this time, so I went, and then very quickly just kind of got absorbed into it all. But even then, I was still not like fully like on board or everything like that because so when I met you, I was still going to the traditional Latin mass in the morning,
Hmm.
and then in the afternoon or evening, I'll be going to the Syro-Malabar Kurbana. It just kind of worked out that I was able to do both. And so the first time when I, started doing that, like, I think it was the middle of 2021. So I was doing that almost like a year and a half maybe of going to both liturgies. And at the time, I kind of told myself, well, I'm kind of just experiencing both lungs of the church. Like I'm getting like a full breadth of the church. And I still believe that. Like I definitely felt like I was getting like both East and West, really kind of being part of both traditions and really honoring each tradition and kind of like really getting a full sense of what the Catholic Church entails. Um, but then later on, as I got more and more involved, it just made sense that God was saying that you need to invest your full time and efforts and talents and everything into the Syro-Malabar Rite. And so when that happened was sometime around spring of 2022. I I was able to have this conversation about the Syro-Malabar Liturgy, and for a long time actually, like I could talk about the Syro-Malabar Church or its history, like the fact that I'm Syro-Malabar, but and I would share that information with many people that I encounter. So a lot of friends that I made when I was, doing City on a Hill events. All those friends knew what I was doing, especially the ones that I got really close with. They knew that I was Syro-Malabar. They heard information about it, maybe some history, the terminology, Kurbana, all that kind of stuff. But I never, up until that moment, could recall a time where I invited someone to come and attend the Holy Kurbana. And this was something that during this one conversation that I had in spring, I was like really reflecting upon, and I realized that in order for me to really be like fully alive in this identity, I have to share it. And it took a while to kind of get there, and I really wanted to share it. And the reason why I held off on sharing it for so long, and this is, like I'll definitely kind of get into, more of these details later, but I definitely felt this kind of embarrassment by the Syro-Malabar liturgy. There's a lot of cool things about it, or very beautiful traditions and everything, but a lot of these things are not necessarily honored or dignified or practiced. And I always felt kind of either ashamed or some kind of embarrassment. And if I invited my serious Catholic friends to come to the Holy Kurbana, I would have this kind of like secondhand embarrassment by the liturgy because they're gonna see the way we kind of do things, and they're gonna be like, wait, this is the kind of liturgy the Syro-Malabar Rite. This is what you guys do. Like this doesn't look reverent, or this is kind of goofy or something. Like I was just really, you know, embarrassed by those things. Like what would they think about this? But at a certain point, I realized that this is something very core to who I am, and it, you know, I need to share it. And even if what I share is not necessarily living up to like a high standard or something or anything like that, at the end of the day, this is like who you are. This is what you've inherited, and this is a part of you. The same way your parents would, they might embarrass you or anything like that. They're still your parents in the end of the day, and you love them, and they love you, and so you wouldn't necessarily hide your parents away from people or something like that. You would want to like they're a part of you. They're a part of who you are, and so that's kind of how I started thinking about the Syro-Malabar liturgy and our community and everything like that. And maybe I might get embarrassed or something. Maybe I'm not necessarily, like the way we do things might not live up to what I'm expecting it to look like or something like that. But in the end of the day, in order for me to really be alive in my identity was to be comfortable enough in order to share it with some other people. And so during that time, I decided that what if I could invite people from City on a Hill and other friends or like the friends that I made through City on a Hill to come attend the Holy Kurbana. We could have some food afterward. We could have like a small explanation of what's going on. And for a while in the community in Kansas City, we didn't do the Holy Kurbana in English. We were primarily doing it in Malayalam. For the
Mhm.
most part, the liturgy, the Syro-Malabar liturgy throughout the world, like a good majority of them are it's going to be celebrated in Malayalam. Like that's the vernacular language of the people. But I really thought it would be good to introduce a Holy Kurbana in English. I talked to the priest about it. He was on board. Got the community involved. They started practicing the hymns and everything like that, and we got ready for that day. And I think over 40 to 50 young adults from the Kansas City area came to our community, our mission, and they got to attend Holy Kurbana, have food
Mhm.
afterward, and they really enjoyed it. And then from there, that's when I really felt like God was saying to me, okay, this is who you are. This is a part of you. This is something that you care so much about, and it's not something that He wanted me to let go, because maybe at some point I was trying to like have one foot in, one foot out, ready to escape, and if something goes, the wrong way, so to speak, in the Syro-Malabar Rite, okay, now you have an exit route. But that's not what God was calling me to do, and He wanted me to really be part of it and really start sharing this with others, and not just non-Syro-Malabar Catholics, but Syro-Malabar Catholics themselves,
Mhm.
because I think in a general sense there is this identity crisis in the Syro-Malabar community at large. We don't really know who we are, like what we're supposed to be about or we should be at. And part of my channel was to try to answer some of those things. So, for example, it might seem like a very small topic, what to call the liturgy. Like some people say Syro-Malabar Mass, or they would just say Malayalam Mass and stuff like that. And they're not really thinking much about like the terms that they're using. But my videos during that time was to try to kind of explain why it's important to say Kurbana, even if we're speaking in English or Malayalam, doesn't matter the language. Kurbana is a great way to describe our liturgy, and really it captures what we're doing. So that's kind of, I believe that's, kind of hit all the different points in my story and everything like that. Now I've been currently working on other different projects related to it. So trying to make the liturgy of the hours more of a common practice, and kind of working on some things related to that. Recently, I recorded with some other members of the Syro-Malabar community um, our our hymns in like without all the instruments and everything. We just did straight a cappella, and we recorded some of those songs. So stay tuned for that. Um, so there's a lot of different projects happening, and there's definitely different video ideas I have. It's just a matter of getting the time to make it happen and make it a reality. And one thing I told a lot of people as I was really kind of getting very in tune with everything that's going on, and really being invested in the growth of this community and the sharing of it as well, was this there's the story of the man that discovered this treasure in this field, and he sold all his possessions to acquire this field so he could have this treasure, because he knew the value of this treasure. So I think about that story a lot, and I share this story a lot. The reason why is I really do believe that the Syro-Malabar Church, or this tradition, is this there's a treasure there, and we've inherited it as if we inherited the land, but we don't really know the value of this treasure. And in some ways, this treasure is actually hidden somewhere in this field that we inherited. So I've been, my mission lately has been uncovering the treasure that's been kind of hidden away from a lot of people, and sharing it to everyone I can. So that's kind of like a kind of high level view of what I'm trying to do and what I'm about.
Yeah, it's worth emphasizing that when people think about the Catholic Church, they often think about the Roman side of things, the Latin side of things, and they'll think about Mass, and they'll think about, how things look with the Latin aesthetic, right? And then, oh, there's this thing over here that's the East. But in reality, right, the Catholic Church has multiple rites within it, and has multiple communities that are united together through the Bishop of Rome, and having communion with each other. And so I think it's really beautiful to see that here, Aljo, you have a community of people who share this history with you, who share this community. And so I think it's maybe worth talking about then now, what is the Syro-Malabar Rite? And I know that's a huge question, and you can give a lecture on that if you wanted to, but um, I mean, maybe just starting really basically, and then we'll get into more of the nitty gritty. What are the words? What do the words Syro-Malabar even mean? What does that mean?
Yeah. That's a great question. So yeah, definitely I could tuck your ear off if
Hmm.
if you let me. But yeah, so in short, so Syro Malabar, the word Syro is just a way to reference Syriac, and Syriac, from what I've understood, is the Greek way of saying Aramaic. And for your listeners out there, Aramaic is the language that Jesus spoke.
Mhm.
So it's a very like Syriac is. I always like to describe it as like the churchy version of Aramaic. You know, it's
Mhm.
like the same way there's ecclesiastical Latin and classical Latin and all that kind of stuff. There was like a Latin specific to the church, and so there was a Syriac or Aramaic specific to the liturgy. That so that's part of our history. And Malabar is referring to the coast of India or like the region of India that Saint Thomas the Apostle came to when he spread Christianity to India and
Mhm.
to my ancestors and all that.
Mhm.
So that's kind of where that term comes from. And even that term, what's really fascinating is it's actually not a term that we would have used like 1,500 years ago. You know,
Mhm.
it's actually somewhat recent in our history. Maybe I want to say like 100 some odd years. You know, like it's only been around. And the reason why is when there was Christianity in India, they were referred to as a few things like St. Thomas Christians is one way to refer to the community that was in India, St. Thomas Christians. Another name that was used is Nasranis, so people following the person from Nazareth, so Jesus of Nazareth. So they were called Nasranis, um, and so these were kind of the terms that was used. And the Syro-Malabar terminology and that kind of identity was only like I said, like 100 some years old. So even in our history, there was not kind of like a term that was used throughout and kind of stuck around. Like all these have been used at different times and different places, you know, like in different times to describe, you know, what this is all about. Um, so I guess I could kind of start jumping into the kind of history of the Syro-Malabar Rite, right? Like where it kind of originated from.
Yeah, go into the origins of it. Mhm.
Yeah. So like I mentioned before, Saint Thomas the Apostle had a Christ experience during the resurrection. So Jesus rose from the dead. Everyone knows the classic story of doubting Thomas, and I do have a bone to pick with that one. So I don't really like that Thomas, you know, the founder of the St. Thomas Christian and everything like that, our faith tradition, he gets this name, Doubting Thomas, and Peter, you know, he denied Jesus 3 times, and no one's calling him a denying Peter, or that's not a term that we use. So anyway, but St. Thomas the Apostle, he had this encounter with Christ. He got to profess my Lord and my God, and then he traveled all throughout the Middle East and got was able to get all the way to India and spread Christianity. There's different reasons why there was that connection to India, and from what I've read about is there possibly were Jewish communities even out in India because India was part of the trade routes, and so there was reason to believe that St. Thomas didn't just go there kind of arbitrarily, just kind of happened to go there. There's definitely routes to India. There was a connection between India and ancient Israel and like the Jewish people at the time. And so he established several different, 7.5 communities, is what they say, all throughout the Malabar coast. And um, unfortunately, or for whatever reason, there was no like hierarchy or anything really established. So for the first 300 years of Christianity in India, there wasn't really that kind of same connection that the other communities out throughout the like the Roman Empire, like the Middle East and all throughout Europe had. And so there was a connection maybe more to the Middle East, like that Persia kind of Persian area. Um, but at least the first several hundred years of Christianity in India, we don't know like a ton about it. But as far as we know, it definitely didn't like explode in terms of its growth or anything like that. It was kind of maybe, if anything, I would describe it as a little bit more stagnant. It was there, it was present. I think there are, especially historically, I think it was the Japanese or Koreans, like there wasn't like missionaries or anyone sent to those places, but somehow Christianity was alive still when people like later was able to go. So in if anything, the Christianity in India somehow maintained itself to some capacity. And then later on is when it started really growing. So the next kind of phase, so that was kind of early Christianity in India. the next phase is past 300s. We're getting to when there is more connection with the Church of the East. Well, I guess the Christians in India were part of the Church of the East. So this Church of the East spanned from the Middle East, so like Iraq, Iran, like that kind of area, all the way down to India, and it's also said to have gone all the way to China and everything. So really large land area that it was covered. Even different artifacts and stuff were discovered throughout, like I believe like northern India or like Afghanistan, like that area. There was like different things that was discovered to kind of prove that Christianity did spread all throughout these areas. And so um, from there onward, the hierarchy or the kind of structure became um, the Syriac tradition, or like this community that was based around, I believe it was Antioch. So if there's anyone listening and I'm getting some facts wrong, please fact check me. Definitely just still a student of all this stuff and don't always have all the facts lined up in my head. But essentially from like, let's say like late 300s to about 1500s, the community grew and was established and was kind of rooted in the Syriac tradition. So the liturgy was done in Syriac completely. A lot of its like customs and stuff like that, like the liturgical customs, the hierarchy, so the bishops and everyone, the priests were all supplied by the communities out in like the Syrian, like that area, the Middle East area. And so I don't believe that there were like too many like native priests or any like native born, like native Indian born priest. If there were, there was like different positions like the archdeacon. So maybe there was some priest around. There's a lot of like information. There might be more than I'm kind of letting off, but definitely during that time, this is when the liturgy formed really deeply with the Syriac tradition. And then the next kind of phase of this church is the Portuguese interaction. So during this time, this is 1500s, colonization was happening. The Portuguese, other colonial powers at the time, they were able to find different routes to come to India. And during this time, there was the Portuguese Catholic missionaries that came to India, discovered that there was Christianity. There was, a community of Christian people, right? St. Thomas Christians, as they were called, because all the people during that time, they always referred to their Christian roots all the way back to St. Thomas himself. And so they were called the St. Thomas Christians, and there was this contact between, or at least more of a direct contact between the St. Thomas Christians and the Portuguese Catholic missionaries and stuff like that. And so exciting times, of course, because now we're talking about, hey, there's a Christian community out in India. They have some structure, they have bishops and a liturgy and everything like that. But this kind of that time period of getting to be acquainted with each other didn't kind of turned to be a little bit more not as positive, right? And so coming into the later half of the 1500s, that's when there was a lot more tension and issues. There was accusations of Nestorianism, heresy, related to the Holy Kurbana, or like the liturgy of the time, and in its theology and everything. So that was accused, or that was the accusation at the time. And there was also a lot of movements to try to almost uproot or upend a lot of things that the St. Thomas Christians were doing and make it more Latinized. And I think one thing to note during this time, and possibly why all this kind of happened, was the Protestant Reformation, or that was happening also in Europe. So there was this sense of, well, if it's not what we're doing, it must be incorrect, or it's going to lead to heresies and everything like that. So it made sense, at least in the general mindset of the Catholics coming from Europe, that we need to make sure all the Catholicism is looking like what we're doing. And so that led to schism, and there's definitely a lot of history related to this. So a group split off, and even just how that schism happened is not a very very positive story, even for people that were pro breaking off. it's kind of not like the best intended, like best people with the best of intentions, or maybe they had good intentions, but it definitely didn't come about in the right way.
Mm.
So the community split into essentially like three, right? So there was people that wanted to preserve as much of their Syro-Malabar, or sorry, their former ways of doing things, the St. Thomas Christian way of doing things, and but they still wanted to be in communion with Rome. Then there was other ones that became Latin Rite, or like just fully Latinized. And then there was the other group of people that wanted to not have any connection with Rome, and they schismed off as well. I felt like you
Yeah,
wanted to ask something.
was this post Reformation that these three kind of splits happened?
Yeah,
Or
yeah, it was.
I don't want to, or three differentiations happened.
Yeah, I believe the Reformation was like 15,
Yeah, in the
like
1500s.
1530s. Yeah, like earlier though, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, so there's the famous Synod of Diamper. I want to say it was 15. Oh man, someone's gonna have to correct
It's
me on
okay.
this one.
Just go on.
Late 1500s, okay?
Hmm.
So when that happened, that's when the schisms all like started really kind of going on.
Mm, mm,
So that was like so post Reformation time. So
mm.
it kind of makes sense that the mindset of any Catholic European would be, if it's not what we're doing, it has
Right.
to be, like corrected and, adjusted in a way that it
Mm.
has to look like what we're doing. What
And
was in, yeah, go
yeah, I
ahead.
was going to say, although the schism, for example, between the Orthodox and the Catholics happened in 1054, that also took time for it to like really settle in for people that, oh wait, our communions are split.
Hmm.
But it sounds like with the Syro-Malabar Rite, like I noticed that you jumped straight from early church history right to the Reformation. So I'm guessing I mean maybe there was some connection, but did the Great Schism affect the Syro-Malabar Rite at all?
Hmm.
Or did you start seeing like the Orthodox version, if you will? I mean, I know that I'm using anachronistic terms here, uh, but like, did that, let's say, did the other group become Orthodox? Were they already Orthodox near soon after the schism, the Great Schism, or did they become Orthodox after this part in the 1500s? If that makes sense.
Yeah. So I guess the best way to kind of explain that is thinking about things kind of geographically too.
Right. Okay.
There may have been connection between India and the Middle East, but even the Middle East, there's a lot of things that happened during that time. So, for example, the Islam started spreading all throughout and took over huge swaths of the Middle East, all the way up to like northern India and everything like that. So that was one factor into why communication between the Christian community in India
Hmm.
was limited, or kind of limited to the Church of the East, right?
I
And
see.
so like, oh, that was part of it, right? So, but then there was also the Byzantine, you know, its history was Constantinople and kind of like more the near Middle East, Eastern Europe, like I believe it went down to like Northern Africa, maybe parts of it, like the eastern part of it. And then there was like the Western, like Christian communities and like the Latin Rite and everything. And so if you look at all the kind of like places geographically and politically and all the different things that were happening, there the schism was more so in the Great Schism was more so in
Mm,
the Roman Empire, right? And even though there would be some connection, it didn't affect it in its development in the same way that it affected the kind of direction that the western half of the Roman Empire went and the eastern half of the Roman Empire went, and its liturgical heritage and its customs and all that kind of stuff that happened. And so, similarly, when that schism happened, there was another community, like out there also kind of forming in its own way too. So if you look at the Syro-Malabar traditions and its history and sorry, yeah, its liturgical traditions, there are things you could see, some similarities and everything like that, but definitely it grew up differently. It
mm,
matured in a different kind of way,
mm.
that didn't necessarily have the same connection to the Orthodox. And so, what I would consider Orthodox in the Syro-Malabar Church would be the West Syriac tradition. So there's a East Syriac tradition and a West Syriac tradition. Um, I'm part of the East Syriac tradition. The West Syriac tradition, so from what I remember, I believe there was there was also even just like different politics and different kind of things going on in Antioch and everything like that. And so different kind of communities forming or different traditions, bishops, all these kind of whatever kind of stuff. And that kind of formed in that kind of way. And so when the community was trying to split off and schism out, they were able to find solace and a hierarch in the West Syriac tradition. The At least in my opinion, the great irony is in order to preserve the St. Thomas Christian way of doing things, the group that schismed off became West Syriac, which has not the same connection with in terms of the East Syriac way of doing things. So that was kind of, like kind of, I don't know, what would you say, like kind of an irony in,
Hmm.
like in history and that kind of thing. But yeah, so I think what we consider orthodox or like an orthodox equivalent to what we're doing is very different than how the Roman Rite sees the orthodox and like the kind of general orthodox kind of sense of it. And I think yeah, I don't know what the relationship between the Orthodox and Byzantine kind of world had with the Syriac world. I'm sure
Hmm.
there was more connection because, at least geographically, we're talking about like a little bit being, a lot closer. But in terms of how the liturgy developed, there might be some things that kind of blended across the two rites or the two, traditions.
All right.
Hmm.
So you were talking about these three communities that formed. One community that just went fully Latin, one community that remained in communion with Rome but retained kind of the more traditional,
Well,
you know,
some things, yeah,
some
some
things of the
aspects.
traditional liturgy of the Syro-Malabar liturgy, and then a third group that joined the Orthodox Church, basically, if I'm not mistaken.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yep, yep. Yeah, so and even the community that remained in communion with Rome, essentially when you look at what they were doing, the vestments that they were wearing, everything like that,
Mm.
it was pretty much, like very much Latinized. The only thing that, at least one of the key things that I found very surprising is um, the liturgy was celebrated fully in Syriac still,
Mm.
even though for all intents and purposes, it looked and felt very very much like the Roman Rite liturgy. The language was actually Syriac, so a lot of things were like pretty much everything. The whole liturgy was translated from Latin to Syriac, which I think for a lot of people that would be kind of surprising. And if I'm wrong about that, please someone out there correct it. But if this is true, that means that like something resembling the Latin Rite was done fully in Syriac way before vernacularization and everything that
Mm.
happened post Vatican II. That actually happened like 500 years ago, which
Mm.
is kind of fascinating. But that actually kind of gets more to like another point that I've kind of I guess I hinted at some point. Um, but like the importance of Syriac in our liturgy. Um, and so if at the time when all these different traditions that the St. Thomas Christians had, they were either upended or different literature that we would have had would have been burnt and everything like that and just kind of lost to history. The one thing that the St. Thomas Christians really held on to was the language of Syriac. And what I tell people is, so like during the time of Christ, there was four prominent languages. There's the language of the law or like the empire, the Roman Empire, which was Latin. Greek would, you could argue was the language of the philosophers and the kind of brainiacs of the time, right? And then uh, Hebrew was the language of the religious leaders. So like the temple, like temple leaders, all that kind of stuff. They would have, it would have been Hebrew. And then the language of the everyday person was Aramaic. This is what Jesus spoke, the apostles spoke, and all of, kind of like that early Christian community spoke Aramaic. Um, this also means that the Our Father, when Jesus taught his apostles and all the people gathered there how to pray, he would have said it in Aramaic. When he did the words of institution, from last I read, all the scholars believe that he would have done it in Aramaic as well. And so when, the St. Thomas Christians thought about the language of Syriac, they always connected the language of Syriac as this is the language of Isho, right? Jesus. This is what Jesus spoke. This is what, for up until now, like this is what our ancestors did. We passed it on, passed it on. And they never wanted to lose the language of Jesus. And that was the one thing that, if anything, like was preserved still amongst the community. And up until like 50, 60 years ago, that was still the case. So even if all the aesthetics and everything like that in the church, like how the churches were built, what the priest was wearing, all the different things was very Latin influence and Latin heavy. All the devotions started coming of like the rosary and Eucharistic adoration, all these things that happened, saints, use of statues. Even if all those kind of came in, the one thing that the St. Thomas Christians kind of fought for was the use of Syriac in the liturgy. And that, so definitely our ancestors believed that there was something very important about making sure that this was preserved to some capacity. And even today, even though we do things in Malayalam, like, predominantly in Malayalam, words like Christian words that we use in Malayalam, so Kurbana, Isho, Mariam, Mamudisa, like these are Syriac words. They're not native Malayalam words. They were just kind of absorbed into
Mm.
the language of Malayalam.
What was that
But
last word? You said,
Mamudisa.
yeah, what does that mean?
Oh, so that means baptism.
Ah, okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then Malaka, which means angel, right? So
Mm.
like all these like Christian words and everything like that, they were directly just plopped into the language of
Mm.
Malayalam. What's interesting now, and this is kind of goes back to my video that I made, the first video that I made, Mass versus Kurbana. The word, so now when we speak in English, now everyone just switches over to say Mass. And it's
Right.
like, well, if Malayalam didn't, like have a proper word other than using the Syriac word, why should it just automatically just change when it goes to English, right? Um, so that was at least an argument that I made. It's like, we kept the language in Malayalam, let's keep it in English too, or yeah, that word in Malayalam, that we should
Mm-hmm.
keep that word in English as well, or any
And
other language that we're speaking.
remind me what kurbana means.
Yeah, so kurbana means offering
Offering.
or sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Um, the word kurban is used in the scriptures. I believe
Yes.
it's somewhere in
Mm-hmm.
Matthew, like
Mm-hmm.
Jesus referring to, the kurban. Yeah. And so this is
Mm.
kind of where we get that word kurbana from.
Oh, that's very
hmm
interesting. All right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Um, yeah. So yeah, there's also something to be said about, like if God incarnate like could have chosen any language, he could have chosen the language of the Roman Empire. He could have chosen the language of the philosophers. He could have chosen the language of the religious leaders. He didn't choose any of those to communicate his message to to those people, right? He chose that language, and maybe there's something more significant that we're maybe we haven't yet discovered, or maybe we have, but there is something kind of peculiar about God choosing that language out of any language during that time that was relevant to communicate his message.
Mm.
And I don't want to lose that. I don't want to pretend that now we could just toss it into the history books. Like, no, that is a little interesting,
Mm.
that would be the case. And then for the majority of the history of the St. Thomas Christians, that language was very much preserved.
Mm.
Um, so I know that language is very important for like the people from the Syro-Malabar community. A lot of them come from the Malayali tradition. So Malayalam is the language of Kerala, which is the state that the Malabar kind of state, like that area. And so the for people, especially as they immigrated to America, Australia, all over the globe, the Malayali population definitely finds it very important to preserve the Malayalam language to some capacity, like especially when they're talking about their grandparents, their kids being able to communicate with their grandparents or even to their parents themselves. There's something very comforting when someone that you talk to knows your language.
Mm-hmm.
So if that is the case for our people in the present day, I've had several situations where I know Malayalam fairly well, and I would encounter someone and they also happen to be Malayali, and maybe they're coming from India, maybe only like a few years ago, and I would tell them, or like I would ask them like, hey, are you Malayali? And they would be like, oh yes, I am. And then we just start speaking in Malayalam, and they just feel so much more comfortable in it and speaking in it and expressing themselves in it. And if that's the case for that, like Malayalam, like it has that effect, and this effect could be described in every community that has like different languages and stuff like that. If that is the case, maybe there's something, maybe we could be comfortable in that Jesus spoke this language, and
Hmm.
we get to share in that. Like this is, like the language of your heart, or like the language you think in, the language of your heart. That's where you could best express yourselves, right? Like even though I know Malayalam, I could best express what I'm really thinking and really is on my mind and on my heart when I speak in English. If I try to do that in Malayalam or Spanish, which I know like conversational Spanish, like that, it's not going to be communicated in the most effective way and really speak my heart. So if that's the case for me, who might know different languages, but the language that I could really express myself is in English, um, God chose to express himself in Aramaic, so like maybe, right? Maybe there's something there.
Hmm.
So I,
Hmm.
I don't want to, I don't want to ever lose that connection to Jesus Christ himself, like Isho Mishiha, right? That's the word,
Hmm.
himself. So yeah,
Could you also, I mean, maybe this will get into the conversation on liturgy, but I'm sure some people would be interested in hearing, like, okay, what are some Aramaic words that you say during Kurbana?
yeah.
I think people just love to hear the language
hmm So I've
and
used
the
a few.
Syriac too. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I've used a few. So Kurbana meaning offering.
Right.
So referring to the liturgy. Isho Mishiha. So that would be Jesus Christ. And what's really cool is in Malayalam, we greet our priest by saying Isho Mishihai Kistudiyarikirte, which means praise be to Jesus Christ or glory to Jesus Christ. And
Hmm.
so, you know, even when we're greeting each other, greeting our priests that way, we're still using Isho Mishiha, which is the Syriac way of saying Jesus Christ. Um, so I have used Malaka, meaning angel, Mamudisa,
Mm.
meaning baptism. I think one thing that I was actually thinking about as I was kind of thinking about this interview was I think it would be really cool with my broken Syriac to say the Our Father in Syriac.
Hmm.
So if you're down to hear it, I'll try my best,
Yeah. Do you want to do that now or?
Yeah, I guess we could, so like this segment could be just some Syriac.
Yeah, I mean, just give it a shot. See how it goes. Hmm.
Yeah. Awundwashmaya, Naskandashmag, Tese Malkusag, Nahwe Savianag, Aikanadashmaya Aphara, Howlan Hamadasan ki Yaumana, Washwoklan Hauben Wahatahin, Aikanada Panam Shukan Lahayaven, Vlata Len Lasiona, Lampasan Vindisha, Mitholi Dilaki Malkusa, Wahairawatashbota, Lalam Almin, Amen.
Wow, that's beautiful. Hmm.
So yeah, our Father. So when Jesus said, like pray
Mm.
this way, he would have said it pretty much similar to what I just said right there. And
Mm.
I think that there's something really powerful about that. Yeah,
Well, Aljo, if you're ready, I'm ready to talk to learn about the liturgy a bit more.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, definitely. Let's get right into it. Um, I think some of the things that I'll try to highlight is just like like the things that really make our liturgy kind of stand out amongst other liturgies of the other rites. So one prominent thing is just the architecture itself, right? So we have a separate table or altar used to do the liturgy of the word. We have another altar used for the liturgy of the Eucharist. And we also have these kind of like side altars, but they're not necessarily altars, they're more like side storing places for the gifts to be placed at. So the Bema, which is another Syriac word, so I'm probably going to be using some Syriac words to describe different things. So the Bema is where the liturgy of the word is, and traditionally, where it was placed in the church was very fascinating. It was actually placed in the center of where the congregation gathered. So the idea is that the Jesus Christ came to be amongst the people and like came to the center of the world to be amongst us in order to spread the gospel. So where the congregation gathers is called haikala, or earth, or it means earth. And so placing the bema right in the center means that, you know, the word of God dwelt among us, like literally dwelt among us, like right at the center, is where that would be placed. And then from there, there's the sanctuary. And so the sanctuary is called madbaha. And so the madbaha would be separated by a veil. And during a certain portion of the Syro-Malabar liturgy, the veil would open up, and now God in his full glory, the Holy Trinity, would be represented. And let's see. And so then the side like tables that I referenced, they're called betkasa, and that's where on one side the bread is kept, and the other side is where the water and the wine are kept. So later on, in the liturgy, there's a moment where that's brought up to the main altar to celebrate the liturgy of the Eucharist. So let's see. Would it be helpful to kind of switch over to the video and like kind of see maybe certain parts of it, or just kind of like get a general feel of how that might look like?
Yeah, I think that would be good.
Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen real quick. So this video, I could at least highlight a few different things that's going on in terms of how the church looks and everything that's going on. So right now, if you see where the priest is standing, that's the bema. You could see the veil kind of going on. If I fast forward a little bit, so you can see that the veil opens and now the sanctuary is revealed. So this is actually something that's kind of cool about the Syro-Malabar architecture, liturgy, and everything like that. A lot of what we do actually goes back to Jewish roots, or it has Jewish roots. So for example, the bema, I believe in Hebrew, there's a word bima that they use where the Torah is proclaimed from. And I think if you look at how the Jewish temple looked like during the time of Christ, there was one portion of the temple that was used for people to gather and listen to the Torah being read from. So when Christ opened up the scriptures and read from, I believe Isaiah, that would be done in one portion of the temple where the people are gathered and listen to the word of God. And then there's the other part that's separated out, and there's a veil, and this is where the priest enter in order to do the sacrifices. And then there's also a place like even more like special than that called the Holy of Holies, right? This is where you're like directly right with God. And for us, there is this also Holy of Holies ideas. So when we go from the liturgy of the word to the liturgy of the Eucharist, the priest enters the Holy of Holies. That's how we refer to that, that kind of entrance into it. And this is where the sacrifice is going to be done. And so, yeah, just the whole kind of like use of the veil, the use of the different tables and what each table signifies in terms of like what's being done there. All that goes back to Jewish practices.
It's a mix of the synagogue and the temple together.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. And so we try to preserve that architecturally as well, because I think even in the Latin Rite, like there are places kind of referenced that way, like, oh, this is like the temple and this is the synagogue. But for us, we also try to keep that in the look of it too, like where different things are actually done physically too. And then what else? Yeah, so like there's a lot of things that if you so we do our so liturgy of the hours, right? When we consider our day, we actually do the whole custom of sundown to sunrise, or sorry, no, sundown to sundown, right? So like our 6 p.m., would be when we start the next day, basically how the Jewish people do it. I know that is practiced for like a Saturday, like on Saturday evening, it would be like a Sunday vigil. So that's practiced to some degree, but at least if you look at the liturgy of the hours in the Syro-Malabar Rite, that's still the same thing. So like we would do evening prayer and that starts the day and everything like that. So all these things all go back to the Jewish people. So I think that's another aspect that we maybe people are not necessarily aware of, but it's definitely really embedded into what we do. Um, yeah, and one thing that you might have noticed is the veil opens from the center out, right? Opens like this. This is something kind of cool, like a cool difference to highlight between the Syro-Malabar Rite and then the West Syriac rites, such as the Syro-Malankara Rite, or like I believe the Maronites and stuff like that. But what I've heard about the veil, the use of the veil in the Syro-Malankara Rite is it opens from um, right to left. And so their tradition, or like in their customs, we also practice too. The women sit on one side and then the men on the other. And so when their veil opens from right to left, the side that the women sit at is where the veil starts opening first and then to the men. And this is to represent how the resurrection was first revealed to women and then to men. Um, Very cool, right? Just like in one little symbol of the veil, like that much, kind of cool theology and, stuff, is like kind of explained. For us, we actually emphasize something different. So during the time um, when Jesus died, it said that the veil torn in two. And so that's kind of what we're doing in this moment when we sing the hymn of resurrection, as you could kind of see in the bottom, that title there. When we're doing the hymn of resurrection, that's when the veil opens up. And then you will see heaven opened up for us, and that gets, like the gates of heaven get opened. That's kind of what we're representing during this moment. Um, and yeah, let's see. So I'm just wondering if there's a moment where we could go up to the altar. It's kind of hard to see. Um, yeah, so I might struggle to find a place where you could see what's on the altar because, how the priest is kind of covering it, right? But one thing I'll point out is on the altar, this is where God is present. And the altar, like the main altar over there where the sacrifice is done, it means different things. It could be the sepulcher of our Lord. It's the throne of God, everything like that. So one symbolism that I absolutely fell in love with that about the altar is on the altar there is kind of a space, kind of like empty. There's no like active symbol or anything like that. Then on one side, there's the Syro-Malabar cross. So like that would be placed on one side. And then the other side would be the gospel. And so the three persons of the Trinity would be represented on the altar. And so when the sanctuary veil opens up, now you get to see God in his Trinity fully revealed to us. So I just really love that symbolism and everything that we get over there. What else? So
And
any
Aljo,
more specific? Yeah.
yeah, Aljo. I mean, you have the cross, right? The Syro-Malabar cross.
Yes,
Hmm.
I do. Yeah.
You want to
Thank you
show
for
that?
reminding me.
Uh-huh.
Yes. So this is, my cross. I guess I could stop the share screen real quick.
Sure. Hmm.
You could see it a little bit bigger. So this is the Syro-Malabar cross, and right away, one thing you'll notice is there's no crucified body of our Lord. So because Saint Thomas had a encounter with Christ in his resurrection or moment of resurrection, or like after he rose from the dead, our cross represents that very moment, like the resurrection. We're resurrected people, like we're from from that. That's kind of what we like to emphasize in our liturgy. I usually generally think that the emphasis or kind of like the aesthetic feeling of the Latin Rite is very much on the sacrifice on Calvary, like that kind of experience. Whereas for us, we really talk about the resurrection of Christ a lot, or like that symbolism is very much all throughout. I mean, of course, we do talk about the sacrifice on Calvary, but the emphasis really tends to go to the resurrection of Christ. So there's a lot of different symbolism. I could highlight a few different things real quick. So it's on a lotus, which is kind of like which is a symbol of India, and just also like the church kind of blossoming over like the waters, and or like It's like something beautiful comes, comes into fruition, I guess. It's also a budding, like these are buds, so it's like budding and like kind of growing that way. Um, what else? There's the dove representing the Holy Spirit. And then there's like these three steps, which you can see right here. So, like the the three steps to like, the journey to Calvary and that kind of thing. So, but it's definitely very rich in meaning and, very dense and stuff. I went very quickly over those, but yeah,
Yeah,
this
I
is
mean,
this.
one thing I noticed is that it almost looks like an anchor. Is that
Oh,
intentional or
I don't.
unintentional?
I like that, and
Yeah.
actually, like, I don't
Mm,
know if that's actually, like intentional to look like an anchor, but
sure.
one thing that when you said anchor that reminded me of is I've read somewhere that like the St. Thomas Christians used to build their churches in the shape of a boat. And, it goes back to, like Jesus being on the boat and like finding a place of refuge, in the raging storms and seas and everything like that. The boat is the place of refuge. And so, at some point, some churches were built in that kind of way. So like when you said anchor, that's what it kind of reminded me of. Maybe like this is the anchor in our lives, right? Which it's true, right? So I like that. Yeah.
All right. Well, Aljo, do you want to share your screen again, or is there anything else you want to show before we get to our
Um,
last question?
Yeah, is there any like more specific, actually, okay, so I guess what I could do, I don't necessarily need to share the screen. I'll just
Mm,
point out a few things, just kind of briefly, instead of architectural, more like what's in the liturgy itself, right?
sure.
I think that would be really helpful. So there's maybe five key things that kind of stand out in terms of the Syro-Malabar liturgy. So one of them is obviously there's different hymns and everything like that. One of the things that we do is we have four readings. We have a reading from like this is more traditionally practiced. Maybe practically it might be a little bit more difficult, but at least there's a long-standing tradition of reading having four readings. So we would do one from the Torah, right, the Pentateuch. Then we would read one from the prophets, and then we would read the epistles, and then lastly we would read the gospel. So, like definitely the church wants to root itself in the scriptures and all portions of it, not just the New Testament, but like the Old Testament as well. So that's like one thing to highlight. Another thing to highlight, I actually have a document. If you give me like 2 seconds, I could pull it up. So the last time, so what I want to do is like every year invite people that are curious about the Syro-Malabar liturgy and everything like that to come experience it. So this past year, Suan was able to come, right? So you got to experience, our liturgy. And prior to, um, the celebration of the Holy Qurbana, I gave kind of like an overview of like the different like significant portions. I want to just pull that up so I could make sure I talk about that. So um, yeah, so another thing to highlight is the different hymns, right? So there's the resurrection hymn, and so that's like a very ancient, or like it's a very ancient hymn that we sing. That the tradition says Adam, the first man, sang this when Jesus came to him to bring all the righteous to heaven. And so the hymn would go, Lord of all, we bow and praise you. Jesus Christ, we glorify you, for you give man glorious resurrection, and you're the one who saves his soul. So this is what the tradition says Adam sang and so there are like very unique hymns all throughout the Holy Qurbana that we do that's very different than any other rites. That's very unique to us. Um, so the other thing that's happening is I mentioned how there's the um, two side tables, right? The betgazas. So that means like the house of treasures. And so the treasures that are kept is the bread and the wine, which becomes the body and blood of Christ. And at a certain portion during the liturgy, it gets processed up to the main altar. It gets put into like a shape of the cross. The the priest hits the chalice and the paten, like 3 times. There's all that kind of stuff going on. and that's in order to symbolize, like, let's see, yeah, when he hits it 3 times, it's supposed to represent like the completion, and three is always like like a number that's very significant, and also it represents the third hour, and the third hour is when Christ died, and so that's kind of like kept when he's doing that. Then the next things that are very unique to our liturgy is our anaphoras, or the Eucharistic prayers. So our anaphoras it goes all the way to Mar Adai and Mar Mari. So Mar is another Syriac word meaning Lord. We also use that word Mar to refer to our bishops or to saints. Saints Adai and Saints Mari, so Mari, Mar Adai, they were direct. Well, one was a direct disciple of Saint Thomas the Apostle, and the other one was a disciple of. So I want to say Adai was the middle. So Adai was the disciple of Saint Thomas, and Mari was the disciple of Adai, and so very close in like historical relation to Saint Thomas the Apostle. So the tradition says that they composed these Eucharistic prayers, and there's all sorts of controversies that came about because of these Eucharistic prayers. There's no like words of institution and things like that. I think later on those got kind of corrected, or like different things got kind of added into it. But at least like when you look at like the original way it was done, it was not like the same as the Latin Rite. So we also have anaphoras from Mar Theodore and Mar Nestorius as well. And so our anaphoras are very like beautiful, very like kind of lengthy as well. But there's a lot of things going on during that time.
When you say Mar Nestorius, you're not talking about Nestorius, right? The
So yeah, I believe that it is a different person, but
okay,
I don't want to
yeah.
like I don't want to say anything that I don't necessarily know 100%. But I think there's reason to believe that it is a different person. Like it's not the same Nestorius that
So
came up with
I
the.
see in the I guess in the records it just says Mar Nestorius, but you don't know if it's that Nestorius or another Nestorius.
Yeah, yeah. And so
Okay.
I don't want to go too far with and
Hmm.
spread some misinformation about
Sure.
whether it's the same guy or not. But I'm pretty sure it's a different guy. But only those other two anaphoras were approved somewhat recently for us to use. So for the most of our liturgy is celebrated with the anaphora of Mar Adai and Mar Mari. And there are certain times throughout the year, certain big feast days that you would use the anaphora of Mar Theodore and Mar Nestorius. The only thing is that hasn't been a kind of common thing just yet. It's still always the anaphora of Mar Adai and Mar Mari, and it's a good one, But it would be nice to start making that more of a common thing to see the other anaphoras, especially if it's all approved and everything's good to go. There's no theological issues or anything going on with them.
Mhm.
Um, and then what else? Then the other kind of like one or other bigger point is the epiclesis is actually done after the the institution of the Eucharist. So in the Latin Rite, for example, it's the calling upon the Holy Spirit is done before "This is my body, this is my blood" is all said. For us, it's actually afterward that the epiclesis happens. So that would be like another kind of key element. And obviously, there's a lot more, but those are kind of like big highlight moments to kind of point out that showcases that this is a very unique and different liturgy.
All right, Aljo. I guess on this last topic then on the liturgy, when I mentioned that I was going to talk to you about the Syro-Malabar Rite, some people were like, "Oh, that's really exciting," but they heard that there was some controversy going on right now. I think in India, I don't know if it's
Mhm.
affected the U.S. as much, but certainly in India over the rite. Can you talk about what's going on and how long it's been
Yeah,
going
yeah,
on and all of that? Mm.
definitely. And I think what's happening with the controversies in India, I think kind of also kind of points to kind of like my mission in the past like year or so, and just like what I believe God's kind of calling me to do. And it's to really honor and, bring dignity to the traditions of the Syro-Malabar Rite. I think for a long time, a lot of what was seen, and still presently, it's still seen this way. A lot of what's seen as from the tradition or from our ancestors or everything like that, a lot of it is just not seen with the same kind of dignity that it should have. For example, our community is very much, like we love Mother Mary. We pray, the rosary together as a family. Like this is such a very common practice in our communities to do all these different devotions that do come from the Latin Rite. And I'm totally fine with doing all those things and do it myself. I practice that myself. But a lot of times when you're trying to introduce things that come from a Syriac tradition, now it's seen as somehow it's radical or rebellious or something like that. And even some conversations that I had with priest friends of mine, they're kind of privately being like, "Oh man, like I think it makes sense to do this or wear certain attire that would be, more in line with our kind of traditions." And um, one thing to point out, and I'm surprised I didn't mention this when I was giving kind of like the kind of historical thing, but the Assyrian Church of the East and the Chaldean Church, they're our sister, like, or they're sister churches to us, right? So the Chaldean community is in communion with Rome. The Assyrian Church of the East is not in communion with Rome. There have been attempts to try to see if that could be that could happen, but we share the same kind of liturgical lineage. Like we're pretty similar. Like we say the word kurbana, like all three of us, right? So anyway, but like the priest of the Chaldean church and like the Assyrian churches that hold on to more of their kind of traditional practices, a lot of times when we try to do that, the Syro-Malabar priests try to do that. Now it's like, oh my gosh, like what are you doing? Like this is radical, like this is radical behavior. Um, and there's been so many controversies. Like the one that's happening now is just one amongst many of them. So you know how I showed you the Syro-Malabar cross? Even putting the Syro-Malabar cross in churches was like a controversial thing. I pointed out the veil. Use of the veil is seen as a controversial thing. Um, the use of like some Syriac or like all these like there's a lot of like the priestly attire and everything. The there's so many things in our rite have been passed down to us or traditionally it was around that now it's seen as controversial if we're trying to restore this back. There's a lot of reasons to believe that maybe there's use of liturgical fans, also controversial. In our wedding ceremony, there's the crowning ceremony, like with other Eastern Catholic churches, and that's seen as controversial. It's like, man, like a lot of things are just seen as like, whoa, like this is too much. You're being radical if you want these things. So in light of all that, the current controversy that's really been the kind of hot topic in the Syro-Malabar Church is the direction that the people face. Or sorry, the direction that the priest faces when he's celebrating the Holy Kurbana. And so the kind of history behind all this. So traditionally, basically every church you could look at, every tradition, ad orientem or facing east, liturgical east, was the tradition of. I believe every tradition that was the case. So same thing with our ancestors, our rite facing east, liturgical east was the practice and everything. During the kind of changes that were kind of coming about during the 1960s, 1970s, 80s, the post-Vatican II era, a lot of things started happening in the Syro-Malabar Kurbana as well. So the churches and the dioceses that were very heavily influenced by the Latin Rite, they also started becoming, they just continued on that. So if they were very Latinized with traditional Latin customs and practices, now they started getting Latinized with I guess, the Novus Ordo way of doing the Latin Rite. So when the Novus Ordo started doing things like ad populum, like facing the people, the churches that were in these dioceses that had a lot of Latin Latin Rite people as well, the Syro-Malabar churches that were Latin, in dioceses heavily, populated by Latin people, they just started adopting all those things. So the Holy Qurbana in certain dioceses um, was doing the Holy Qurbana fully ad populum. There was no ad orientem or anything like that. But then there was some other dioceses that were doing full ad orientem or facing liturgical east. At a certain point, the bishops came together. This was 1999. They came together and they said, well, we need to have a uniform liturgy. Let's compromise. Let's have the liturgy of the word done facing the people and the liturgy of the Eucharist facing, ad orientem. And that was agreed upon, but in practice, it wasn't implemented. The reason why it's not much of a controversy in the US is from the inception of the diocese in the US, they just said in 1999 the bishops, the synod unanimously agreed to have the liturgy, the Qurbana done ad orientem ad populum 50-50. So let's adopt that, no issues, and then that's just been the precedent in the US. But in India that wasn't the case. Even after the unanimous decision to do it that way, not every, like many dioceses didn't follow it, whether that was the dioceses that were saying we want to do it full ad orientem or full ad populum. Somewhat recently, in the last, like, I wanted to say 2, 3, 4 years or so, the bishops revisited this issue and said we still haven't implemented this decision that we decided back then, or like the bishops decided back then. We must have this not be an issue anymore, because what's happening now is because of the diaspora of the Syro-Malabar Church, there's people that are coming from different dioceses from India and then settling in places like the US, UK, Australia, where there are Syro-Malabar communities, and then being kind of confused, being like, wait a second, like back home in India, like we do it this way. Why are we doing it this way? And there's all sorts of new, like confusion that gets introduced to people because, the liturgy isn't uniformed, or at least that aspect of it, or that question is not the same all across the board. And so the bishops said, okay, we need to implement this. And so where this issue starts, or where this controversy really started kind of heating up and going all over the place, is one diocese out of the other. So there's 35 dioceses all throughout the world, all throughout India and everything. So 35 total. Um, the other 34 dioceses decided, okay, the synod made this decision, we'll implement this. So even the dioceses that did full ad orientem, they said, okay, we'll accept this synodal decision and we'll do the 50-50 compromise. One diocese, and that's the Ernakulam Angamali diocese, they said, no, we want to do everything ad populum like we've been doing for the last 50 years or so. We want to do it that way. And this is where the controversy is. They're still, even to this day, still fighting to do the whole liturgy ad populum. And this problem got to the point where like the priest, lay people, like there was people that came into the churches, destroyed statues from what I heard, disrupted liturgies. I believe that the cathedral of Ernakulam Angamali diocese haven't celebrated a Qurbana since December, if I'm not mistaken. So this problem has been there's no solution being gotten to because some priests and lay people from this diocese are just not letting go. And so this is where the controversy, like this is the issue. And even when Rome weighed in, they also have to be very careful about how they weigh in, because when Rome tried to do things like, hey, follow this, that led to schism. And so now, some people are even floating like, would this cause into some schism where one, diocese just kind of does it this way, and now they're their own entity and not in communion with Rome and everything like that. So I honestly don't know what is going to happen. I do have to give praise to the bishop and our major archbishop for trying to make sure that the decision of the synod is still implemented, even though that there's people like not willing to listen, and there's been like a letter sent out to them, and apparently that wasn't read. There was also even like effigies like burned in the streets and stuff like that. Like this is getting pretty nasty, right? And honestly, like this is another reason to kind of like it's upsetting to me that when people hear about the Syro-Malabar Rite, I'm trying to get them excited about all its traditions and very beautiful things. that then they start Googling themselves, like, okay, let me know a little bit more about the Syro-Malabar Rite. And the first thing that comes up on a Google search is there's this controversy over the liturgy and, all this kind of stuff. So it's really sad, and definitely there needs to be a lot of prayers, and hopefully, hearts changed. But it makes me think about, who really are the kind of radicals in our church, right? And I, you know, when Swan, like when you met me, when Swan met me, I was still, I was going to Latin Rite too. Like I was going to the, the traditional Latin mass and all that kind of stuff. So I have great, respect for the Latin tradition and everything like that. But I want that same respect, given to the Syriac traditions. And I don't want to see, like our Eastern Syriac traditions being seen as a radical thing, right? I mean, in many ways, like, I mean, I'll just put it out there. My opinion is we shouldn't compromise. We should, go back to our roots of full ad orientem and everything like that. That might be too controversial, but I don't know. Like, I feel like a lot of times, compromise with people that don't necessarily have the best heart into this might not be a great strategy in the long run. But I'm gonna trust, like out of obedience, like like I'm gonna trust what the bishops decided,
Yeah.
and everything like that. But it is, surprising that the diocese that was the most Latinized or the most Latin influenced, with how it does its liturgy and everything about it, is the one saying like, is rejecting the decisions and everything. So, yeah, kind of surprising that that would be the case. But
Mm.
um, yeah, I don't know what to make of all of it. But I do hope that one day like everything will be kind of figured out. And if anything, like, you know, it's amazing how much issues even like 500 years ago, or like controversies and schisms 1,000 years ago, could still have lasting effects on the people today.
Right.
Um, so like the schism that happened in the St. Thomas Christian community, it's still impacting us, because a lot of times when we start introducing such, Syriac traditions or those kind of elements and those kind of things, a lot of people recognize them as Orthodox thing and not necessarily part of the Syro-Malabar Rite,
Mm.
which I found really fascinating. So a lot of people could recognize, okay, we've seen this before, but isn't that an Orthodox thing?
Mm.
And it's actually like it's not just an Orthodox thing; it's actually also part of our tradition too, if you look a little deeper into it. So that's where I kind of feel like I'm coming in and being like, actually, no, no, this is also part of us too. Like this is part of our heritage, and we want to bring these things back, and restore it as
Mm.
well. So
Well, we should, ask for the intercession of Saint Thomas, and for everybody who is watching. And if you're, Catholic or even Orthodox, and you want to just pray for this community and the unity of it, let's just pray to Saint Thomas for that unity. Um, and we'll do that, off camera. But Aljo, thank you for coming on to my show. I really
yes,
appreciate that. Mhm.
yeah, definitely appreciate your time, and I've been so thankful of our friendship and just our conversations. Like, basically, this is what we do, right? Just
Yeah,
talk
right.
about liturgy, like every time we hang out.
Yeah, and like have and go to a restaurant and just have good
Yeah,
food and
yeah,
all that. Yeah.
yeah. I think we've experienced three different liturgies together, if that,
I
right?
think
So
so.
we,
Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
because we were both at the Byzantine Rite together, the Ruthenian Byzantine. We were at the Syro-Malabar Rite together, and we were at
Hmm.
the Latin Rite together. It's like,
Right.
all right, let's keep it going.
Right.
We need to see them all.
Before we end today's episode, I just also wanted to have Aljo share a little bit about his YouTube channel so you can go and find it. So, Aljo, I'll let you kind of close out the episode.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you so much. And again, thank you for having me on your show, and your podcast. And I hope many people listen to it and you know are inspired by what's happening with Syro-Malabar Rite, and definitely offer prayers for our community and our rite as well.
Mm.
So this is my channel, and as you can see, I don't look like this anymore. And even like the church in the background, it's like, maybe it could be a little bit more traditional. No, I'm just kidding. Like
Mhm.
where's the veil? No. Anyway, but yeah, so this is my channel, Brother Syro. Feel like definitely I need to, you know, add more videos to it. There's a lot of different types of videos that I do. I try to be kind of funny with it and here's that return video that I was talking about,
Uh,
just epic, movie trailer and everything like that. This is the video that started it all, Mass versus Kurbana.
mm,
And, I have had, all sorts of interesting kind of things, and I have a lot more planned. And one thing that, if you subscribe to my channel, that hopefully you'll start seeing soon is me and a couple other people, Joel Sanil and Rosemary. We recorded Kurbana music. We did a few in Syriac, a couple in English, one in Malayalam, and there's more to come one day. But we recorded a good handful of songs from our Kurbana that we recorded at the Byzantine Rite with the help of my roommate and friend Kevin White. And so I'm hoping to post all those on the Brother Syro YouTube channel so people could take a listen at the Kurbana hymns. Some other channels to go check out is Syro Creatives. There's also Ruha Media, so that would be one to check out. The Christological, I'm gonna get their name. Okay, so this is also a really good source for they have a whole Aramaic project. So the Christian Musicological Society of India is quite the mouthful. So definitely several channels out there that would be a good source of information. But again, thank you so much for having me on this show, Swan, and really appreciate your time and hearing it, and just being a good friend in this mission that I'm on. And it's great that we get to support each other doing it.
yeah, Aljo, it's great to see you again.